días. Mi nombre es Jim Hall. Me llamo Jim Hall. Y yo trabajo en el proyecto FreeDOS. Hace muchos años yo hablé mucho español, pero ahora yo hablo un poco de español. Mi presentación es en inglés. So hello, my name is Jim Hall. I'm from the FreeDOS Project. And many years ago, I used to speak quite good Spanish, but today I only speak a little bit of Spanish. So I will do the rest of my presentation in English. So this is about 30 years of open source software with FreeDOS, the FreeDOS project. And so my name is Jim Hall, and there's my contact information if anybody would like to reach out to me or find the FreeDOS project website at freedos.org. So let me tell you, for those who don't know what DOS is, really should talk about my first PC and kind of how this started. Back in the early 1980s, so 1981, we bought an IBM PC 5150. We had an Apple computer before that, but the IBM PC was really the first, serious computer that we had at home. And, it had, by today's standards, very low specifications. We're talking an 8088 CPU that ran at a very slow 4.77 megahertz in terms of speed. It had our model had about 64 kilobytes of memory. You could also upgrade that to 640 kilobytes. It had a monochrome display. It had 5.25-inch floppy disks that could store 360 kilobytes of information. And I'm not misspeaking here. Kilobytes is what we used at the time. And you think about how big is that? You think about a gigabyte. A gigabyte is what we tend to think about today. 1 gigabyte of storage is about 1,000 megabytes. And 1,000 megabytes, 1 megabyte is about 1,000 kilobytes. So that's how small things were back then. And we were glad to have that amount of memory. That was what we had at the time. And you could still do quite a lot in that limited amount of memory. And the operating system that the IBM PC came with was called DOS. The first one is called PC-DOS because of personal computer DOS. And DOS by itself, DOS, stands for Disk Operating System. But it was a very simple operating system, and it was entirely command line driven. And so every time you needed to do anything in DOS, you would have to do it by typing commands on the command line. And it was a very simple operating system, but it was more powerful than what we used to have on the Apple II computer, which was a very limited command line experience. DOS had more tools, DOS had more commands, and over time they added to it. And so DOS was a very powerful, although simple operating system for the era, the 1980s. And into the 1990s. So we're going back in time quite a bit here. There were a couple of very popular operating system applications for DOS at the time. WordPerfect was an extremely popular application. That was a word processor. And there were many word processors for DOS. You may also have heard of WordStar, also some other ones like PC-Write and things like that. But WordPerfect was really an extremely popular program, especially for businesses. And so there was a time in the 1980s where if you had WordPerfect on your resume, you were almost guaranteed a job. And it was, we go back today, you look at WordPerfect through today's lens, it is kind of simple, but it worked really well within the memory constraints of DOS. And notice these DOS applications all run in what's called text mode or console mode. And that was very typical of DOS. It wasn't until later you started to be able to support graphics. And so WordPerfect, whenever it had to do highlighting of some kind, would use different colors. And so you'll notice that the normal text here is in sort of a gray color against a blue background. That was a very common color combination on DOS. To do bold, you might show that as a bright white color. To do underlining, you might, as you can see on screen, you might invert the color so it's blue on a sort of gray background. And that you might use other colors for italic type and things like that. And so, but despite that limitation, it was very popular and it was very powerful, being able to use, uh, being able to use WordPerfect. And I used it all the time. I used WordPerfect when I was in high school to write papers for class. I used it when I went to college, although I'll show you in a minute what word processor I switched to later on. Another very popular application was a program called Lotus 123. And Lotus 123 was a spreadsheet application. It was not the first spreadsheet application for desktop computers, but it was really the one that kind of took the market by storm, especially when the IBM PC came out and you had DOS. It really ruled the 1980s and even into the 1990s. Again, very powerful system, and I used it as an undergraduate student to do lab analysis. I was a physics student at the time. I used this also in high school for certain things in math classes and science classes and things like that. But again, you're seeing a sort of a very plain console mode view, but it was extremely fast, very powerful, and very fast. And I could, once you know how to work around in an application like this, you can get a lot of work done very, very quickly. Also, though, there were lots of games, and I mean, DOS had uh, millions of games. I mean, there was if you could think of what kind of game to play, someone had made a game like that. This is a game that was one of my favorites at the time called Commander Keen, and a lot of games around that time were actually in this model called shareware. And what that meant was that you could download a copy, and you do that over a modem, or you would get a floppy somehow from somebody else, and you would download this program and you could try it. You could play the game, and usually it was broken up into a number of episodes. And so Commander Keen had three different episodes, each one with a number of different levels. And you could play the full episode one. And then when you were done, if you wanted to play the whole thing, you had to register it. You had to send in some registration fee, usually not very expensive. And then you got to play the rest of the game. And that was that shareware model worked really well, and it was something that actually an industry came up around shareware stuff. And so this got me thinking at the time, you know, software for DOS doesn't have to be just boring, business software, WordPerfect and Lotus 123. It doesn't have to be expensive software either. I mean, WordPerfect was, very good, but it was also extremely, extremely expensive. And Lotus 123, same thing, very, very expensive software. And here you started to see programs that under the shareware model that you could try before you buy. And they were typically much less expensive than buying something sort of box software like WordPerfect or something. And there were lots of other programs, not just games, that ran as sort of a shareware model. So one of them was a spreadsheet application called As Easy As. And it was called As Easy As because in English there's a phrase as easy as 1, 2, 3, and Lotus 123. So this was as easy as 1, 2, 3. And it worked the same as Lotus 123. It was very powerful, equally as powerful as Lotus 123, but because it was shareware, Well, one, you got to try it out before you decided you were going to buy it. So you actually got to do quite a lot of work in it. And it wasn't in any way hampered. It was the full software. You just didn't have a manual to come along with it. And then if you liked it, then you would send in a little registration fee, not very expensive. And then you could get the full version of the software, including a manual. They would send you a floppy, they would send you a manual, a printed book, and it worked really, really well. And as an undergraduate physics student in university, this was my power tool. This is what I used as a physics student to do lab analysis. And this is a typical lab that we might have done in one of my lab classes, where we might do a falling experiment, and you can see that it would do what's called line intercepts on the right-hand side, and so it could actually even show you the error values in things like the slope, things like the intercept. And this was very important as an undergraduate student, that you wanted to be able to report not just what value you had, but what was the error in that value. And it was very, very expensive. And by the way, today, this is still my favorite spreadsheet application. Even though it's for DOS, it's still my favorite spreadsheet application. And I'm very thankful that the people who made this software actually released it not as open source, but as gratis. You could download this software for free, and they released the registration code on their website. And so if you go to our website, we actually link to their website over at Trius Inc. But this was, as I said, very inexpensive compared to Lotus 1-2-3. There was another program I used called Galaxy Write. Galaxy Write, like the stars, was that was where it got its name, and it was extremely powerful, the same as WordPerfect, but I thought it was much easier to use. And it wasn't very expensive. It was more expensive than As Easy As, but it was much less expensive than buying the new version of WordPerfect. WordPerfect, it has a student edition. I think the new version of WordPerfect at the time was $300, I think. Um, and this, as the shareware program, was about $100, so about a third the cost to get a program that is, I thought, easier to use and just as powerful as WordPerfect. And now I could write all of my papers for class using formatting and just be able to do that at home. Again, same sort of concept as WordPerfect. As you can see, this has some bold text, which it puts in that bright white color. It has italics text that's in sort of that blue color up on the screen where it says shareware. And so it looks the same and works the same as WordPerfect, but it was just less expensive. And I love this idea. I love this idea that people could create software that replaced proprietary software, and it worked just as well. It was still something you had to buy. It was not, open source. That concept wasn't really out there until a little bit later, but it really kind of got me thinking a different way about how we use software. And in fact, in 1993 is when I first discovered Linux. Linux was actually originally in 1991, but I found it 2 years later in 1993. And this is a screenshot from my Linux system I would have used at the time. And, as an undergraduate student, we had a computer lab on campus with Unix machines, and I thought Unix was really powerful. It was like DOS. I very much still liked using DOS, but now you had a Unix operating system that had a command line very similar to DOS. It had different kinds of applications, but I wasn't afraid of the command line because, of course, I'd been using DOS this entire time. And now to discover that there's this open source software libre, where you could, not just download the software for free, but also the source code. And you could examine the source code to do the things, to make it do things that you wanted to do. You could fix bugs, you could add features. And it was just a great piece of software. And it really changed my mind about, again, how we use software and how we distribute software. Now, I did know about Windows, and at the time there was a version of Windows for PCs, and that was Windows 3.1, and this is a screenshot from Windows 3.11, which is the next version up. And this was the version that was out around 1993. And I didn't run Windows at home. I didn't like Windows at all. But we had it in our campus computer labs, again, as an undergraduate student. Uh, I my decision was it was not very reliable in terms of software. It was very slow. It also had this problem where uh, if you had one Windows program that didn't behave well, or it crashed, then it could actually bring down all of Windows. And so I just did not like using Windows. I was not a Windows fan from the beginning. I've never really liked Windows. And the problem, though, was, okay, so Windows ran on top of DOS. And so to run Windows 3, you had to have a copy of DOS. And so, DOS was still a thing even when Windows was around. Uh, but in 1993, in 1994, I was reading some computer magazine articles where Microsoft had said, the next version of Windows won't use DOS at all. Uh, DOS is dead. And I didn't like that. I did not want to be pushed over to Windows. Again, I didn't like Windows. I thought it was unstable. And I thought, wow, if Windows 4 or Windows 3.2 is going to be anything like Windows 3.1, I don't want anything to do with it. I would rather keep using DOS. And I was still using Linux at home. I was now using Linux, but I actually was booting back and forth into FreeDOS, or into MS-DOS, sorry, into MS-DOS to run DOS programs because Linux didn't have a bunch of applications yet. But I liked running Linux and I liked running DOS, but I definitely did not like running Windows. And I did not want to be pushed into running, only Windows. And I thought, well, if people can come together and create an open source Unix system, somebody must be able to do the same thing with DOS, right? There must be an open source version of DOS. And so I asked around on different. There was a concept called news groups at the time, and one news group I asked, is anybody working on an open source version of DOS, kind of like Linux, but DOS? And the general feedback was, no, no one's working on that yet. But that sounds interesting, and you should do it. And so I said, okay, well, June 29, 1994, I sent out an announcement to this group that said, let's create our own version of DOS. We're going to create a new version of DOS, and it'll be something that everyone can use. At the time, I thought public domain was what we were doing because it meant that everyone could use this version of DOS. And so the first version of DOS was what became FreeDOS, was actually called PD-DOS. PD stood for public domain. Very quickly realized that was what we were actually creating was free software. And so, in fact, we were using the GNU general public license for our programs. And so we changed it to FreeDOS in not very long after that. So probably a couple weeks later, we changed it to FreeDOS. Although we did still have a hyphen, and we kept the hyphen until the end of 1995, January of 1996, when we dropped the hyphen consistently, and we're now calling it FreeDOS. And so that's where FreeDOS came from, is this idea of like, we don't want to be using, Windows. We still want to use DOS. We have an interest in using DOS. We like using DOS. We don't want to run Windows. Can we make our own version of DOS? And that's what we did. So we made our own version of DOS. It's open source software, software libre. It works the same as MS-DOS. In fact, our goal is that it should work and the same as MS-DOS. It should run any program that ran on MS-DOS. There are some programs that are sort of, I would describe as corner cases that maybe don't work yet, but they're very, very rare. Pretty much any program you can think of will run fine on FreeDOS. And the great thing about FreeDOS is it's the same as MS-DOS, but it actually is a lot better because RDOS supports other features that don't exist in the original MS-DOS. For example, one of them is LBA, logical block addressing, which was not something the original DOS supported. We also include a bunch of other tools, a bunch of other applications, and a bunch of games that you can use that obviously were not included on the original MS-DOS. That also makes it much bigger, but it is a more, our goal is to make it a more modern version of DOS than MS-DOS. It also supports multiple languages. You could get MS-DOS in different languages, but you were sort of locked into a specific language when you got MS-DOS. Ours is actually something you can change the language as you use it. And for example, during the installer, when you install FreeDOS, there's actually a screen that comes up where you get to select what language you would like to use. And so you can change it down to Spanish if you'd like to use Spanish. And as you can see, other languages on here as well, French, Russian, Turkish. So lots of other languages supported by FreeDOS. And of course, we have, I mentioned, more programs than the original MS-DOS, and they're all open source software. Every program that we include in FreeDOS is open source software. And this is, for example, the package program we have called FD-Impls. You can see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, FD-Impls. That's how you pronounce it in English. But it stands for the FreeDOS Installer My Package List Editor software. And this is where you would install packages that you'd like to install. You get to choose what packages, and everything is a package. You can install an entire group at once, or you can install just one package individually. And so here I'm showing under Editors a program called Fed, which is the folding editor. F for folding, ed for editor. And it's probably easiest to talk about FreeDOS by showing it. And so let me show you what FreeDOS actually looks like. And so here I'm going to go ahead and share my my other screen where you can actually see what FreeDOS looks like. And so this is FreeDOS. This is a live version of FreeDOS, and I've actually just installed some programs. And so let me switch over to that, and I can clear the screen with CLS. And this is the version that I'm using on this system. And you can see that we have FD-Impls, and this is where you can install different packages. Here you can see I've changed my language, or my language is using English. If I were to back out of this and do set lang equals I'll set that again. Set lang equals ES for Spanish. Then if I go back into FD-Impls, now we're seeing it in Spanish. But my Spanish is very rusty, so let me back out of that and set the language back to English. And so if I go back into FD-Impls, here I am in English. If I were to install a game, for example, so you can see all the different things we have in here. We have different applications. These are I just recently installed the DN2 DOS Navigator which is a very nice application for managing files and things like that. We have different archivers on the system. We have different programs as part of base. This is the second CD, so you're not seeing a lot of other programs here yet. Different boot tools, development. And so if you want to do development on FreeDOS, there's lots of different tools to do development with. C compilers, basic system, JavaScript, if you want to work in JavaScript, assembly, more basic programs. This is the free basic compiler. And you can just see all the different programs that you have here that are compilers or developer tools or libraries that will let you work on or create your own programs on FreeDOS. Different device drivers. These are the different editors. My favorite editor happens to be Fed. That's why I was showing it before. And then these different games. Let me actually install a game. And so there's a game in here, lots of different games. There's a version of Flappy Bird called Floppy Bird. But I'm going to install a very small one that I wrote called Sonnet. And this is, if you are familiar with an old board game called Sonnet, that's it. And so all I'm doing here is I'm just pressing the space bar, and that selects Sonnet. And once I go and use Tab to go down to okay, then it installs it, and so I can now go to games. And so if I do dir and I go into games, and then I go into Sonnet, you can see I can now run the Sonnet program. So there's Sonnet, and so quick introduction to Sonnet. You can see the different moves that I can make on the lower right hand side. That I can move 3. Your pieces actually move in this backwards S configuration until they reach this line here, in which case you have to make special kinds of moves. Just to make one move here, I'll move this piece right here. Oh, sorry, I need to move this piece right here. And you'll see that moves 3. This other one now is playing the white side. And so I'm going to move that by 1, and you can see how the different pieces move. And so this is different ways to play the game. I'll escape out of that, and you can see that this is different things you can do in FreeDOS. There's also the applications. I mentioned earlier I installed DN2, the file manager DN2. And then there's the program for DN. And it expects to have a mouse, which I didn't install. And so we've got a little problem here. But there's DN, and escape out of that. And so you have a file manager. So you may be familiar with using different file managers on DOS. And this is very similar to several popular program managers and file managers from DOS in the 1980s and into the 1990s. And so we provide these types of programs for people to use for free. And if you wanted to install your own applications, let me see if I can get out of this here, and I'll exit. And I want to exit, and I'll just show you one other thing. And on my D drive, we're running this on a virtual machine. You can see I've got Lotus 1, 2, 3 up there. I also have As Easy As, and I have WordStar and some other things. And so let me go into As Easy As, just because that's a good example to show. And then this is do a wide listing. This is the As Easy As program. And as I said, this really was my favorite program all throughout high school, and so or rather my undergraduate career. And so we just run As Easy, and now we have the As Easy As spreadsheet. And so if I wanted to fill in some data, you'll notice that you don't actually use a mouse on this. This is one of the reasons I like using it, by the way, is how easy it is to use. And so let's go ahead and center in an X value there, and then over here we'll center a Y value. And then I'll say slash, and then we'll go into range. And then I'm going to do data, and I want to do fill. There we go. And here we'll fill in, let's say, that range there. And I want to start at 1, and I want to increment up by 1. And that's how we're able to fill in some data. And let me actually start 0 over here. And so this maybe isn't X, this is maybe N. And then over here is the Fibonacci value of N. And so if you know your Fibonacci values, the Fibonacci of 0 is 0, the Fibonacci of 1 is 1, and then every generation after that is the sum of the two values above it. And so we can actually insert that here by saying plus, and then we'll say B2 plus B3. And so 0 plus 1 is 1. And if I use slash, I can go to copy that cell, and I'm going to copy from that range. I'm going to go down here to copy it into, and I can copy it into this range. And so now I know that after 11 generations, I have 89. And so this is how you can use a spreadsheet. I just want to do a very simple example. This is not open source software, but you can download this for free, and it was an extremely popular application at the time. And so I'll just do slash to get in the menu, and I'll go down to exit, and that is as easy as. And so there's lots of different things you can do with FreeDOS. As I mentioned, we also have, I'll go back to the MIC drive, we have under Devel, I've installed some compilers, and we have the GNU C compiler, but we have a 16-bit version of that called i16 GNU. We have the Watcom compiler for C, the Watcom compiler for Fortran. Those are just the ones that I tend to work in all the time. I don't work in a lot of Fortran, but I installed that one recently for a demo. And so, the concept of FreeDOS is that we want to make a version of DOS that everyone can use and is available for everyone to download, and with the source code included, so you can try it out for yourself and fix bugs and add new features. And that's all there is for having an open source software project, is it has to be something that everyone can use and access the source code. So visit our website at freedos.org. Right now I'll stop, and I'll wait for any questions that we'll do in the live Q&A. Otherwise, thank you very much for having me at Nirdirla, and have a great rest of the day.